Howdy, Desrich here. Now we're going to talk about step 2, where we deal with a concept called amplitude. You've heard me mention it before so far, but amplitude is how far the function rises above and dips below the baseline. So far, our amplitude has always been 1. All the other functions we've dealt with, if you look at these ones up here, they go up 1 above, and they dip down to 1 below, and they never get any higher or lower than that, both on the sine and the cosine. And that's because there is no number out here. Basically, there's a 1 out in front of each of these functions, a 1 and a 1. That's why the amplitude is 1 for each of those. However, sometimes, if you see a number outside that multiplies the function, then we have a different amplitude. For instance, this function has an amplitude of 3. So, the way I like to think about amplitude is the baseline is the middle of our road. The amplitude tells us, if we're driving left and right, the amplitude tells us the lines we have to stay between. So, if I want to graph y equals 3 times the sine of x, what I do is, do you notice that there was no baseline movement here? There's nothing out here that says like plus 9, plus 10, or anything like that. It's basically a plus 0. So our baseline is the normal baseline this time, the x-axis. From the baseline, our amplitude will go up 3. So our function will reach all the way up to the top at 3 above the baseline. And when it dips down, it will dip down to 3 below the baseline. So now we've got some lanes for our graph to drive within. If this is a sine graph, you know where the sine graph starts. It starts on the baseline. And since our baseline is the x-axis, it starts right there. When it gets to pi over 2, it goes up to the top. Now before, our top had always been up to 1. But that's because our amplitudes had been 1. Now our amplitude is 3. So when we get to pi over 2 on the x-axis, we are at the top, as I always say, the top, and this time the top is at 3, not at 1. At pi, we're back to the baseline. At 3 pi over 2, we're down at the negative amplitude. We're at the bottom, so we're down here at negative 3 now. At 2 pi, we are back to the baseline. Notice how just the function, this blue function, is a lot taller than our normal green function. Just finish off a cycle of it here. Again, this is me doing the second go-round. You don't always have to put a second period or a second cycle of the function. The first one is really all I want to look at. So you could have stopped after this one. You could have stopped right there, and that would have been enough. But this here is what the graph of y equals 3 times sine of x would look like. 3 taller and 3 shorter, basically. Let's try with the cosine graph. You'll notice this time we have an amplitude of 2, which means, but except for you don't see anything out here. There's no change in the baseline. So we have just plus 0 out there with the baseline. So that means our baseline is the normal old baseline, the x-axis. But our amplitude goes up to positive 2 and down to negative 2. So it is a taller and, well, it's just a taller graph. So when we get, oh, Miss Ely's online. Hi, Miss Ely. All right, it's late at night, and I'm a little tired, so I'm a little silly. Our amplitude is now 2. So cosine, since this is y equals 2 times cosine of x, cosine starts at the top. And again, in the past, the top had always been at 1. Well, now the top, because the amplitude is 2, the top is up at 2. At pi over 2, we're back to the baseline. At pi, we're down to the negative amplitude. At 3 pi over 2, we are back to the baseline, and at 2 pi, we're up to the positive amplitude. And we're gonna, I guess we can do the rest here. So it finishes off like that, down there, back to the baseline, and back to the top. So again, you can tell that the blue one is taller than the green one was. I want to get us used to a concept that's important here, is listing our power points. And those are the 5 main points of our graph. They start at the very first point, which you can tell out here is 0, 2. So that's our first power point, 0, 2. This is another one here, over at pi halves, 0. Another one down here at pi negative 2. Another one over here at 3 pi halves, 0. And the 5th power point is the one that ends our cycle here at 2 pi 2. That'll be important on tests and quizzes. I really want you to make sure that you label your power points. That's really the main way I'm going to grade your graph. I want you to be able to graph it, but I also need you to know where these 5 power points move to. That's what I'm looking for. Now, one last thing we're going to try with this one is we're going to see how it looks when there is both a vertical shift, meaning our baseline moves, and then amplitude change. So, can you tell that there has been a vertical shift? That our baseline is going to move? That -3 right there tells us so. So our baseline is no longer the x-axis. Our baseline is down here. That's our baseline. Okay? Now our amplitude is positive 2. That doesn't mean we go up to number 2. We go 2 above our baseline. So since our baseline was down here at -3, when we go 2 up, the top of our baseline will be, or the top of our amplitude will be right here at -1. The bottom of our amplitude will be down here at -5. Do you see how both the top blue line and the bottom blue line are 2 away from the baseline? That's important. That's what we got to recognize. That's how it works. Now this is a sine graph, which means it starts on the baseline, right there. Then it goes up to the top of the amplitude. At pi, it's back to the baseline. At 3 pi halves, it's down to the bottom of the amplitude. And at 2 pi, it's back to the baseline. Then it would continue to do that throughout the rest of its cycle. Let's look at our power points real quick. Okay, there's our power points. Let's check out this last one here, the cosine graph. This time the cosine graph has a baseline that has been moved up 1. You see that? So we got a baseline that is here instead of on the x-axis. Now we've got an amplitude that is 3. So from the baseline we go up 1, 2, 3, and we have the top of our amplitude right there. We also have to go 3 below the amplitude, which means we go down 1, 2, 3, and our bottom of our amplitude is down here at -2. So we've created lanes for our graph to drive within. Remember that cosine starts at the top of the amplitude. So cosine starts up here at the top. At pi over 2, it's back to the baseline. Don't take it all the way back to 0. Take it back to the baseline. At pi, it's down to the negative amplitude. At 3 pi over 2, back to the baseline. And at 2 pi, up near the top, or up at the top. So our graph looks like this. it would continue to do this cycle forever and ever. And what a beautiful graph we have. Let's get our PowerPoints. There they are. There's your PowerPoints. We are done with this one. Try these 3 problems below before moving on to step 3.